My future mother-in-law held up my engagement ring under the crystal chandelier, smiled politely, and then laughed. "Oh, Ethan," she said loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. "I knew you wanted a simple wedding, but I didn't realize you were buying jewelry from a discount store." The room erupted in quiet laughter. Someone whispered that the stone looked cloudy. Another called it a dull piece of glass. I looked down at the soft gray sapphire on my finger and said nothing, because I wasn't embarrassed. I simply remembered something my grandmother had told me years before she handed me that ring. One day, people will judge this stone before they understand it. What none of them knew was that within a few weeks, the same ring they mocked would become the only thing standing between their family and complete financial ruin. My name is Claire Morgan, and until that evening, I believed kindness mattered more than appearances. I grew up in a quiet town where people fixed things instead of replacing them. My father restored antique furniture. My mother taught music at the local elementary school. We weren't wealthy, but we never felt poor. My parents always said the same thing: "Your name is worth more than anything money can buy." Back then, I thought it was just another family saying. Years later, I finally understood what they meant. I met Ethan Carter on a rainy Tuesday. I was helping organize a charity fundraiser for a children's hospital. He had volunteered through his company's community outreach program. Unlike everyone else wearing expensive suits and designer watches, Ethan rolled up his sleeves and spent the entire afternoon carrying tables. He never mentioned that his family owned one of the largest real estate companies in the state. I found out weeks later. When I asked why he hadn't told me, he simply smiled. "I wanted you to know me, not my last name." That answer told me everything I needed to know about him. Over the next 2 years, we built a quiet life together. Weekend road trips, late-night dinners, movie marathons on rainy evenings. We talked about everything: dreams, careers, children, even the kind of home we hoped to build one day. For the first time in my life, the future felt simple, peaceful, real. Then came the proposal. Ethan didn't rent a ballroom. He didn't hire musicians. He didn't arrange fireworks. Instead, he took me back to the old park where we'd shared our first coffee together. The same bench still overlooked the lake. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, he knelt down, pulled out a small wooden box. Inside sat a ring unlike anything I'd ever seen. Instead of a sparkling diamond, a soft cloud-gray sapphire rested in the center. Its color shifted between silver, blue, and smoky gray depending on the light. It was beautiful, different, quiet, almost mysterious. "I know it isn't traditional," Ethan admitted, "but the moment I saw it, it reminded me of you." I laughed through my tears. "How?" "It doesn't need to shine the brightest. It already stands out." I said yes before he even finished asking. The ring wasn't expensive. At least, that's what we believed. Ethan had purchased it from an elderly jeweler who specialized in estate jewelry. The jeweler told him only one thing: "This stone has an unusual history, but history matters more than price." Neither of us thought much about those words. 3 weeks later, we attended dinner at Ethan's parents' estate. Calling it a house wouldn't be accurate. It was practically a mansion. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, paintings older than my hometown. Everything inside seemed designed to remind visitors how wealthy the Carter family had become. As we walked through the front doors, I suddenly felt underdressed. Not because of my clothes, because everyone else looked like they belonged on magazine covers. Ethan squeezed my hand. "You'll be fine." I smiled nervously. "I hope so." His mother, Victoria Carter, greeted us first. She wore diamonds that probably cost more than my parents' entire home. She hugged Ethan warmly, then turned toward me. Her smile became noticeably smaller. "Claire, it's nice to finally see you again." The words sounded polite. The tone didn't. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Business conversations, vacation plans, stories about charity galas and investment opportunities. I mostly listened, occasionally answering when someone asked me a question. Then, Victoria noticed my engagement ring. She reached across the table. "Oh, may I see it?" I smiled. "Of course." I carefully slipped it off and handed it to her. She held it beneath the chandelier, turning it slowly, examining every angle. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then, she laughed. A quiet, elegant laugh, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "So," she smiled at the guests, "I suppose modern romance really has become affordable." Several people chuckled. Someone farther down the table whispered, "Interesting color." Another added, "It almost looks unfinished." Victoria handed the ring to Ethan's aunt. She studied it briefly. "It's certainly," she searched for the right word, "unique." Everyone knew what she really meant. Then Victoria asked the question that silenced the room. "Ethan, how much did you pay for this?" Ethan answered honestly, "Not much. I bought it from a small estate jeweler." Victoria nodded slowly. "I can tell." More laughter. I quietly slipped the ring back onto my finger. No anger. No embarrassment. Just disappointment. Not because they disliked the ring. Because they judged something they knew nothing about. The conversation moved on. But I noticed something. Every woman at the table subtly compared their diamonds to my sapphire. One proudly mentioned its flawless clarity. Another casually described the size of her anniversary stone. It wasn't conversation anymore. It was competition. One I had never agreed to join. On the drive home, Ethan apologized. "I'm so sorry." "You don't have to apologize. They embarrassed you." I looked out the window. "No, they embarrassed themselves." He smiled softly. "That's one of the reasons I love you." A week later, life returned to normal. Until an unexpected letter arrived. It came from the elderly jeweler who had sold Ethan the ring. Inside was a handwritten note. "Dear Mr. Carter, while reviewing some old estate records, I discovered documents connected to the sapphire in your engagement ring. I believe there may have been a significant mistake regarding its identification. If possible, please bring the ring to my shop as soon as you can. There is something you deserve to know." Ethan looked at me. "What do you think this means?" I shrugged. Maybe he found the original owner's information. Maybe. But something about the letter felt different. Urgent. Almost unbelievable. 2 days later, we walked into the jeweler's small shop. He greeted us with an expression I'd never seen before. Not excitement. Not surprise. Concern. He carefully examined the gray sapphire under a powerful microscope. Then he looked up at us. His hands were trembling. "I've been appraising gemstones for 42 years. He swallowed hard. "And I don't think this is an ordinary sapphire." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" He slowly removed the stone from beneath the light. "There are only a handful of gems in the world with these characteristics." He looked directly at us. "I think you need to meet someone who values stones for international museums." And at that exact moment, neither Ethan nor I had the slightest idea that the little gray ring his family had laughed at was about to change all of our lives forever. The old jeweler carefully placed the gray sapphire beneath another microscope. For nearly 5 minutes, he didn't say a single word. His expression changed from curiosity to disbelief. Finally, he removed his glasses and looked directly at Ethan. "Where exactly did you get this ring?" Ethan shrugged. "From you." The old man smiled awkwardly. "I know. But where did I get it?" He walked toward a wooden cabinet that looked older than the shop itself. After unlocking it, he removed a thick leather ledger. Dust covered the cover. "This book contains every estate purchase I've made over the last 30 years. He slowly flipped through hundreds of handwritten pages. Then, he stopped. "I found it." He pointed toward an entry dated almost 20 years earlier. "Private estate sale. No family name. No public auction. Everything was sold anonymously." I frowned. Why would someone hide the owner's identity? The jeweler sighed. "Usually for privacy. But sometimes." He looked back at the ring. "Because the collection is far more valuable than anyone realizes." He handed us a faded photograph. It showed several antique jewelry boxes spread across a large dining table. Necklaces, bracelets, old pocket watches, brooches. And there, almost hidden in one corner, was the exact same gray sapphire ring. I remember thinking it looked unusual, he admitted. But at the time, everyone wanted diamonds. So this ring sat in my display case for years. Ethan laughed softly. So nobody wanted it? The jeweler smiled. Sometimes the rarest things are overlooked because they don't look expensive. Those words stayed with me. He carefully examined the sapphire again. There are tiny natural inclusions inside the stone. I looked confused. Inclusions. Small patterns created deep underground while the gemstone forms. He adjusted the microscope. They're like fingerprints. No two stones have the same ones. Then he looked at us seriously. I can't confirm anything myself, but I know someone who can. Who? A museum consultant. He specializes in rare sapphires and historical gemstones. Ethan looked surprised. A museum? The jeweler nodded. If I'm right, this shouldn't be sitting in a jewelry store. 3 days later, we drove nearly 4 hours to the Metropolitan Museum of Mineral History. The building looked more like a university than a museum. Quiet, elegant, filled with scientists instead of tourists. We were greeted by Dr. Nathan Reynolds, a gemstone historian who had spent 35 years studying rare minerals. He shook our hands politely, then smiled. So, this is the mysterious sapphire. He placed the ring beneath specialized lighting equipment, then under magnification, then into another machine that analyzed its internal structure. The room remained silent. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Neither Ethan nor I dared interrupt him. Finally, he leaned back, slowly removed his gloves, and whispered, "This is extraordinary." Ethan laughed nervously. Good extraordinary? Dr. Reynolds smiled. Very good. He pointed toward the screen. Most gray sapphires are heated during processing. This one wasn't. It's completely natural. He enlarged another image. Notice these microscopic crystal formations? We nodded. They only appear under extremely rare geological conditions. I asked the obvious question. So, is it valuable? The professor smiled. I haven't answered that yet. He opened another cabinet. Inside were several books containing photographs of gemstones from around the world. After flipping through dozens of pages, he stopped, then placed one photograph beside my ring. The resemblance was incredible. Same smoky color. Same soft blue flashes. Same internal crystal pattern. This belongs to a famous collection, he explained. It was discovered over 70 years ago. Only 3 stones from that geological formation have ever been officially documented. My heart started racing. And this one. He looked directly at us. If my analysis is correct, this would be number 4. Neither Ethan nor I spoke. It didn't seem real. The ring everyone had mocked might actually be one of the rarest sapphires on Earth. Dr. Reynolds wasn't finished. I'd like permission to conduct additional testing. What kind of testing? We'll verify the origin, the age, the mineral composition, and whether it matches historical records. How long? About 1 week. As we left the museum, neither of us knew what to say. Finally, Ethan laughed. I only bought the ring because it reminded me of your eyes. I smiled. Good thing you ignored my mother's opinion. He laughed again. I've been doing that for years. Meanwhile, news of our museum visit somehow reached Ethan's family. At Sunday lunch, Victoria casually asked, "So, I heard you've been showing that little sapphire around." Ethan nodded. The museum wanted to examine it. She smiled politely. That's nice. I'm sure they'll tell you it's charming. Another relative laughed. Maybe they'll put it in the gift shop. Everyone smiled. Except Ethan. His father, Richard Carter, finally spoke. How much could a gray sapphire possibly be worth? Before Ethan could answer, Victoria interrupted. Whatever it is, it certainly isn't replacing diamonds. I quietly stirred my tea, still saying nothing. A week later, Dr. Reynolds called. His voice sounded unusually serious. Claire, could you and Ethan come back tomorrow morning? I looked at Ethan. When? As early as possible. Is something wrong? Long pause. No. If anything, it's much bigger than we expected. The next morning, we returned to the museum. This time, 2 additional experts waited inside the laboratory. One specialized in gemstone certification. The other worked with international auction houses. Dr. Reynolds greeted us. I wanted independent opinions before saying anything. He handed each expert the report. They both nodded, then signed the final page, one after another. No disagreement. No hesitation. Finally, Dr. Reynolds looked toward us. I can now officially confirm. This sapphire is completely natural, untreated, conflict-free, and one of the rarest examples ever examined. I squeezed Ethan's hand, still unable to speak. Then came the question we'd both been avoiding. What is it worth? The room became completely silent. Dr. Reynolds slowly closed the report. I'm not comfortable giving an exact number. My heart sank. Why not? Then he smiled. Because it should never have been sold through an ordinary jewelry store. He looked directly at us. If this stone is offered at the right international auction, it could completely change your lives. Before we could ask another question, his assistant rushed into the room holding a folder. Doctor, I found something. What is it? The original ownership records. Dr. Reynolds opened the file. His expression changed instantly. He looked back at us. This ring didn't just belong to someone wealthy. It belonged to one of the most respected philanthropic families in Europe. He paused. And according to these records, the collection it came from disappeared under mysterious circumstances decades ago. Ethan and I exchanged stunned looks. We had walked into the museum expecting a simple appraisal. Instead, we had just become part of a story that had remained unsolved for generations. For a long moment, neither Ethan nor I spoke. The museum office had become completely silent. Dr. Reynolds gently closed the file and looked at us. I know this is difficult to believe. I finally found my voice. You're saying this ring belonged to a famous European family? He nodded. Not just famous. They were known around the world for funding hospitals, universities, and historical preservation projects. He slid an old black and white photograph across the table. A graceful woman stood in front of a grand estate. On her left hand, she wore the exact same gray sapphire ring. The stone was unmistakable. Same shape. Same unusual smoky color. Same delicate platinum setting. My heart skipped. That's my ring. Dr. Reynolds smiled. No, that has always been her ring. You simply became its next guardian. He opened another document. The family who owned it was known as the Ashcroft Foundation. They were respected for generations. But shortly after the Second World War, most of their jewelry collection disappeared. Ethan leaned forward. Stolen. No one knows for certain. There were rumors. Some believed trusted employees secretly sold pieces one by one. Others believed relatives quietly divided the collection to avoid legal disputes. But one thing remained consistent. He tapped the photograph. This sapphire was never officially recovered. I looked down at the ring on my finger. Only a month ago, people had laughed at it. Now historians were discussing it like a lost masterpiece. It didn't feel real. Dr. Reynolds continued. Normally, discoveries like this remain confidential. But because this piece has historical importance, it deserves proper certification. He handed us several papers. These documents officially verify its authenticity. Ethan carefully looked through them. So, now everyone knows what it's worth? Dr. Reynolds smiled. Not yet. And I suggest keeping it that way. Why? He leaned back in his chair. Because rare objects attract attention. Collectors. Investors. And unfortunately, people with dishonest intentions. Those words stayed with me all the way home. 3 days later, life suddenly became much more complicated. Someone leaked information. We never discovered who. but local newspapers published an article. Museum examines rare gray sapphire found in estate jewelry. The article never mentioned our names. But it didn't take long. The Carter family quickly connected the story. That Friday evening, Victoria invited us to dinner again. This time, her tone sounded unusually warm. When we arrived, she greeted me with a hug. A real hug. Not the cold greeting from before. I immediately sensed something had changed. Dinner felt different. Everyone smiled, asked about my work, complimented my dress. Even Ethan noticed. "This is unusual," he whispered. I quietly nodded. Halfway through dinner, Victoria finally asked the question she'd clearly been waiting to ask. "So, I heard the museum found something interesting." Ethan calmly answered. "They're still researching." Richard looked curious. "Is the ring actually valuable?" I smiled politely. "We're still waiting for final documentation." It wasn't a lie. The complete historical report hadn't arrived yet. Victoria leaned closer. "Can we see it again?" I hesitated for only a second before removing the ring. She held it much more carefully this time. No laughing. No jokes. No comments about discount jewelry. Instead, she studied every detail. Almost greedily. Her sister whispered, "It actually looks prettier under better lighting." Another relative added, "I always thought it was unique." I almost laughed. A week earlier, those same people called it cheap. Now, suddenly, it had become beautiful. On the drive home, Ethan sighed. "Did you notice?" "What?" "My family. They weren't looking at you. They were looking at the ring." I nodded slowly. I noticed. The following Monday, Ethan received an unexpected phone call. It was his father. "Can you come by the office tomorrow?" "What for?" "I'd rather explain in person." His voice sounded tired. Very tired. The next afternoon, we arrived at Carter Development headquarters. Something felt wrong immediately. Receptionists weren't smiling. Executives hurried through hallways carrying thick folders. Conference room doors stayed closed. People whispered instead of talking. Richard welcomed us into his office. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked exhausted. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. His suit hung loosely on his shoulders. He quietly closed the door, then looked directly at Ethan. "Our company has a problem." Ethan frowned. "What kind of problem?" Richard took a deep breath. "Our largest construction project has been suspended." "Why?" "Unexpected environmental regulations. Half our financing disappeared overnight." He rubbed his forehead. "And several investors are demanding immediate repayment." I glanced toward Ethan. Neither of us had expected this. Richard continued. "If we can't replace the funding within 60 days, we may lose several properties." He paused. "And possibly the family estate." The room became silent. That mansion, the one filled with crystal chandeliers and priceless artwork, could actually be lost. Richard looked toward me, then toward the sapphire, almost casually. "I heard museums insure pieces like that." My stomach tightened. Ethan immediately understood where the conversation was heading. "Dad." Richard raised both hands. "I'm only asking." He spoke carefully. "If the appraisal confirms extraordinary value, it could temporarily secure financing." Victoria entered the office just then. Apparently she'd been waiting outside. "I think it's a wonderful idea." She smiled. "Families help each other." I looked at Ethan. Neither of us answered. Victoria continued. "After all, one ring could save everything we've built." I quietly placed my hand over the sapphire. Something inside me suddenly felt uncomfortable. Not because they asked. Because of how quickly their opinions had changed. Only 2 weeks earlier, the ring embarrassed them. Now, it had become their solution. That evening, Ethan and I sat on our apartment balcony. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, he broke the silence. "I'll never ask you to risk something that's yours." I looked at him. "It isn't about the money." "I know. It's about trust." The next morning, A courier delivered another envelope from Dr. Reynolds. Inside was the complete certification, along with an estimated international auction value. Ethan unfolded the final page. Read one sentence. Then quietly lowered the paper. His face had gone completely pale. What is it? He handed me the report. The estimated value wasn't in the millions. It was significantly higher than either of us had imagined. High enough to completely erase the Carter family's financial crisis. High enough to attract worldwide attention. But hidden beneath the valuation was one final paragraph. A paragraph that changed everything. It read, "Ownership of this sapphire may be legally disputed if any direct descendants of the original Ashcroft family can be identified." I looked up in shock. So, this ring might not legally belong to anyone yet? Dr. Reynolds had written one final handwritten note beneath it. Before anyone makes financial decisions, you need to learn who the true heirs are. And neither Ethan nor I realized that someone else had already read the same report. Someone who had absolutely no intention of letting us keep the ring. I read the final paragraph again. Then again. The words refused to leave my mind. Ownership of this sapphire may be legally disputed if direct descendants of the Ashcroft family can be identified. I slowly folded the appraisal report. Ethan looked just as unsettled. So, what happens now? I took a deep breath. We wait. Neither of us wanted to make another decision until we knew the full story. The ring had already brought enough surprises. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was at work. It was Victoria. Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. "Claire, sweetheart. I'd love for you and Ethan to come over tonight." I hesitated. "Is everything okay?" "Oh, of course. I've planned a small family dinner." "No business. Just family." Something about her tone felt rehearsed. Still, I agreed. When we arrived at the Carter estate that evening, I immediately realized this wasn't a family dinner. 3 men in expensive suits were already seated in the living room. One introduced himself as a private banker. Another specialized in luxury asset financing. The third worked for an international investment firm. I looked at Ethan. He looked just as confused. Victoria smiled brightly. "There you are. We were just discussing solutions." "What solutions?" Richard cleared his throat. "Our company." He looked exhausted. "The banks are willing to help, but they need collateral." I already knew where this conversation was heading. The private banker smiled politely. "Miss Morgan, your sapphire has attracted considerable attention. We understand it has recently been authenticated." I nodded cautiously. "So?" He folded his hands. "If you're willing to place the ring in temporary escrow, we can arrange emergency financing." Victoria immediately added, "It would only be for a few months." Richard nodded. "Once our next development project is completed, we'll repay the loan. And the ring comes right back." The room became quiet. Everyone looked at me, waiting. I slowly turned toward Ethan. "What do you think?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked directly at his father. "Would you ask me to risk your wedding ring if our situations were reversed?" Richard lowered his eyes. "No," Victoria interrupted. "But this isn't just jewelry anymore. It's an investment. It's an opportunity." "No," I answered calmly. "It's my engagement ring." Her smile disappeared. "You don't understand what's at stake." "I do," I replied. I also remember what everyone at this table said about this ring 3 weeks ago. No one spoke. You called it cloudy. You called it cheap. You laughed when Ethan gave it to me. I looked around the room. Now suddenly, it's priceless. The silence grew heavier. Richard sighed. "Claire, we're asking because we're desperate." "I know. And I'm truly sorry. But desperation isn't a reason to pressure someone into risking something they love." The meeting ended awkwardly. Nobody argued. Nobody raised their voice. But the atmosphere had completely changed. As we drove home, Ethan finally spoke. "I'm proud of you." I smiled. I was terrified. "You hid it well." The next morning, another surprise arrived. This time it wasn't a phone call. It was a letter. The envelope had been delivered by courier. No return address. Inside was a single business card. Harold Bennett, International Heritage Law Group. Written beneath it were 7 words. We need to discuss the Ashcroft sapphire. Melissa, the museum's legal advisor, immediately arranged a meeting. Harold Bennett was an elderly attorney with over 40 years of experience handling historical estates. He greeted us warmly, then placed several old family records on the table. I believe someone contacted you regarding ownership. I nodded. The appraisal mentioned possible heirs. He smiled. It did. He opened a large family tree. The Ashcroft family never completely disappeared. There are still descendants. My heart sank. So, they can take the ring? He shook his head. Not necessarily. He explained that decades earlier, the Ashcroft family had donated part of their fortune to charitable foundations. Some personal jewelry disappeared before the inventory was completed. Because no official theft report had ever been filed, ownership became legally uncertain. In simple terms, he smiled. No one has successfully claimed this sapphire. Ethan looked relieved. So Claire still owns it? For now, Harold answered. But if someone produces convincing evidence, the situation could change. 3 days later, that warning became reality. An elegant woman arrived at the museum. She introduced herself as Sophia Ashcroft. According to her documents, she was the great-granddaughter of the family's final estate manager. She calmly requested a private viewing of the sapphire. Dr. Reynolds called us immediately. You should come. When we arrived, Sophia stood beside one of the display tables. She looked confident, graceful, well-spoken. She smiled kindly. I've heard wonderful things about your honesty. I thanked her, then asked the obvious question. Why are you here? She looked at the sapphire. To learn the truth. She explained that her grandmother often spoke about a gray sapphire that disappeared shortly before the family estate was dissolved. It wasn't valuable because of money, she said quietly. It represented a promise. What kind of promise? Sophia smiled sadly. The sapphire was supposed to be auctioned. The proceeds would build a children's hospital. But before the auction, the ring vanished. The room became silent. Dr. Reynolds slowly nodded. I've read similar records. Sophia continued. My family spent years believing someone stole it. I never expected it to appear again. I looked down at my hand. The ring suddenly felt heavier than ever. Not because of its value, because of its history. Sophia surprised everyone. I'm not here to take it. I blinked. You're not. She smiled. No. I only wanted to know whether the story was true. Harold Bennett looked equally surprised. You have no intention of filing a claim? She shook her head. My great-grandmother always believed the ring would eventually choose the right owner. She looked directly at me. Perhaps. It already has. For the first time since all of this began, I felt genuine relief. But it didn't last long. That same evening, breaking financial news spread across every major business website. Carter Development misses major debt deadline. The company's stock dropped sharply. Investors demanded immediate answers. Banks suspended additional funding. Television reporters gathered outside company headquarters. Within 24 hours, the Carter family empire stood on the edge of collapse. Late that night, Richard called Ethan. His voice barely sounded recognizable. We're out of time. What happened? The banks rejected every proposal. We have 48 hours. Ethan looked at me, then quietly asked, what happens after 48 hours? Richard answered with one painful sentence. We lose everything. As Ethan lowered the phone, there was another knock at our apartment door. Standing outside was a courier carrying a sealed envelope. Inside was an official offer from an international auction house. They were prepared to purchase the Ashcroft sapphire immediately. For a figure so extraordinary, it could not only save the Carter family business, it could make Ethan and me wealthy for the rest of our lives. But attached to the offer was one handwritten note. This proposal expires in 72 hours. And suddenly, The ring wasn't just a family treasure anymore. It had become an impossible choice between loyalty, justice, and the future of everyone involved. The envelope lay on our kitchen table. Neither Ethan nor I touched it for several minutes. The auction house had made an unbelievable offer. If we accepted, the money would pay off every debt Carter Development owed. The family estate would be saved. Thousands of employees would keep their jobs. And we would still have enough money left to never worry about finances again. But something didn't feel right. I looked at the sapphire resting on my finger. For weeks, everyone had treated it like a price tag. No one asked what it meant to me, only what it could buy. Ethan finally broke the silence. I don't want you to feel pressured. I smiled softly. You've said that every time this ring has become part of the conversation. Because I mean it. He reached across the table and held my hand. If the ring disappears tomorrow, I'll still have everything I wanted the day you said yes. I laughed quietly. You always know the right thing to say. No. He smiled. I just know what's important. The next morning, Victoria arrived at our apartment without calling. She had never done that before. She looked exhausted. Her elegant appearance had disappeared. No designer handbag. No expensive jewelry. Just worry. Real worry. When I opened the door, she surprised me. May I come in? I nodded. She sat quietly in our living room. For nearly a minute, no one spoke. Finally, she looked at me. I owe you an apology. I wasn't expecting those words. I judged you, she admitted. I judged your family. I judged your ring. And I judged the kind of life I thought my son deserved. She lowered her eyes. I was wrong. The room remained silent. She continued. I spent my whole life believing expensive things made people important. Her voice cracked. But when our business started falling apart, none of those things helped. The diamonds, the mansion, the luxury cars. They couldn't fix what honesty should have prevented. I could hear genuine regret in her voice. Not the regret of losing money. The regret of realizing what really mattered. I'm not here to ask for the ring, she said quietly. I only wanted to say, I'm sorry. For the first time. I believed her. After she left, Ethan looked at me. That may be the hardest conversation she's ever had. I nodded. Sometimes people don't change until life forces them to. That afternoon, Richard called another emergency board meeting. This time, every investor attended. The atmosphere inside the conference room felt completely different. No one argued. No one pretended everything was fine. Everyone knew the company was running out of time. The chairman stood first. We have one final proposal. He looked toward Ethan. An international investment group is willing to purchase 65% of Carter Development. Richard frowned. And what's the condition? The answer shocked everyone. They want complete control. The room fell silent. The Carter family wouldn't simply lose money. They would lose the company itself. Richard slowly leaned back in his chair. He had spent 40 years building the business. Now, he was about to lose it. Not because competitors defeated him, because pride had blinded him. That evening, Ethan and I walked through a nearby park. The same park where he proposed. We sat on the old wooden bench overlooking the lake. For several minutes, we simply watched the water. Finally, I removed the ring, held it in my hand, and smiled. What are you thinking? Ethan asked. I think your grandmother was right. My grandmother? The woman who sold us this ring. She said history matters more than price. I finally understand why. The next morning, I called Dr. Reynolds. I've made my decision. He smiled through the phone. I thought you might. 3 days later, the museum hosted a private press conference. Journalists from around the country attended. So did historians, collectors, investors, even the Carter family. Everyone expected one announcement, that the sapphire had been sold. Instead, I stepped to the podium. My name is Claire Morgan. A few months ago, this ring was simply my engagement ring. I later learned it was something much greater. I looked toward Sophia Ashcroft. She smiled proudly. This sapphire belonged to people who believed wealth should improve lives. I've spent weeks asking myself what they would want today. I paused, then continued. So I've decided. The ring will not be sold. The room erupted with whispers. Instead, I turned toward Dr. Reynolds. I'm donating the Ashcroft sapphire to the National Museum. Complete silence. In exchange, the museum has agreed to create a permanent exhibition telling the story of the Ashcroft family and the charitable hospital the ring was originally meant to support. Then I smiled. And every visitor who sees it will know that generosity outlives ownership. The audience applauded. Sophia wiped away tears. Even Dr. Reynolds looked emotional. But I wasn't finished. I turned toward the journalists. The auction house also agreed to make a donation. Several reporters looked confused. I explained. They're contributing the same amount they would have earned in commission to children's hospitals. The applause grew even louder. After the ceremony, Richard quietly approached me. I don't understand. He admitted. You could have become unbelievably wealthy. I smiled. I already am. He looked confused. I have a husband who loves me. I have parents who taught me honesty. And I have peace. No amount of money can buy those things. Richard nodded slowly. I spent too many years chasing the wrong treasure. A week later, something unexpected happened. The museum exhibition became an international story. Newspapers praised the donation. Television stations covered the history of the Ashcroft sapphire. The publicity attracted global attention. Tourists flooded the city. Businesses benefited. Investors noticed. One investor in particular contacted Carter Development. Unlike the previous offers, this one came without demands for control. The investor only requested one meeting. When Richard asked why, the answer surprised everyone. I invest in people. And after watching what your future daughter-in-law chose to do, I believe your family has finally learned what integrity looks like. Within a month, the investment agreement was complete. The company survived. Employees kept their jobs. The family estate remained in their possession, not because of the sapphire sale, but because one honest decision restored something far more valuable: trust. 6 months later, Ethan and I stood once again inside the museum. Children wandered through the exhibition. Parents read the history displayed beside the sapphire. One little girl pointed toward the ring. "It's pretty," she said. Her mother smiled. "It is. But the story is even more beautiful." I couldn't stop smiling. Ethan slipped a simple platinum wedding band onto my finger. "What happened to my engagement ring?" I joked. He laughed. "It's exactly where it belongs." We looked through the glass display. The gray sapphire reflected the soft museum lights. It no longer belonged to one family. It belonged to history. As we prepared to leave, Dr. Reynolds handed me a small velvet box. "What's this?" He smiled. "Open it." Inside was another sapphire. Smaller. Lighter in color. Beautiful in its own way. "I can't accept this." He shook his head. "The museum commissioned it. It's a reminder." Engraved inside the band were simple words. "True value is never measured by appearance." Tears filled my eyes. People often ask whether I regret donating a fortune. The answer is always the same. No, because wealth isn't always something you keep. Sometimes, it's something you choose to give away. My mother-in-law once laughed at a cloudy gray sapphire because she thought it looked cheap. Months later, she stood beside me as that same stone inspired thousands of people to support children's hospitals across the country. That was worth more than any auction price. If this journey taught me anything, it's that people often mistake sparkle for value. The brightest diamond in the room isn't always the rarest treasure. Sometimes, the greatest treasures are overlooked because they don't demand attention. Just like kindness. Just like honesty. Just like love. The people who mocked my engagement ring believed wealth lived inside a gemstone. They were wrong. The real treasure was never the sapphire. It was the character revealed by the people who stood around it. And that will always be priceless.